We do apologize. We had some technical difficulties, but better late than never. So welcome again to the Belonging Project webinar, bringing national bar leaders to discuss and prioritizing diversity and inclusion issues during a crisis. So unless you've been living under a rock or just arrived from Mars, you know that the world is experiencing a pandemic. And coupled with that is the fact that in this country, we're also dealing with another crisis of racial tensions and systemic racism. So we'll start by talking DI and COVID. And COVID-19 has made our current reality kind of scary. And we have the belief that it will pass, but we just don't know how long it will take until it passes. What we do know is that we can take this as an opportunity to adapt and evolve. We have a chance to reflect, regroup, and reassess, and we have the very real prospect of creating a more equitable and empowered future for all of us. And so today, I am honored to moderate a panel of distinguished guests. We have with us the president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, the President Bonnie Wolf. From the National Bar Association, we have President Alfreda Robinson. From South Asian Bar Association of North America, we have President Ribi Gill. From the Hispanic National Bar Association, we have President Irene Oria. And finally, from the National LGBT Bar Association, we have President Wesley Bizzell. So I'm not going to introduce them because we're here to hear from them and not from me. So when they have an opportunity to talk, I encourage them to tell us a little bit about themselves and about the organization they represent. So without further ado, we know that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact in communities of color. And so I would ask President Robinson to please address that issue as to the impact that, particularly in the African American community, the virus has had, and how the organization, the NBA in particular, has dealt with that and is addressing that issue.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. First, I want to thank Safe for Shaw and the Belonging Project for inviting me to participate in this panel. Second, I am pleased to announce here for the first time that the NBA will join project effort, and I hope that we can have a long and lasting engagement. As all of you, Peter Robinson, President and CEO of the National Bar Association, which has fought for equality for over 95 years. It is the oldest and largest bar association of primarily, but not exclusively, African American lawyers, judges, law professors, deans, legal professionals, and law students. We are found all over the globe. We've engaged with our affiliates, even now, of course, during both of these pandemics. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I also want to give you context. I am an associate dean at GW Law School. And like many of the law schools, we shut down very abruptly and trying to open up and return our students to a normal educational environment after being away and still away and really engaging remotely. These two positions, as president of a nonprofit that has a long history of confronting tough issues of racial injustice, but also as a academic, a law dean. I've been an administrator for long enough to know that if we are shook up, our students are feeling like they have pneumonia. So I want to thank those who are on the call now and hope that we can do more for you and make you feel comforted during this difficult period. This is a critical moment in American history. to seek justice, equality for all, and the rule of law, as we learned from Lafayette Square last week, to also save this democratic republic. America is in the middle of two horrific pandemics. I've established task force on both. I'll talk about that quickly in a moment. One pandemic is caused by COVID-19. COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on African Americans. African Americans constitute only 13% of the U.S. population. However, African Americans constitute 23% of COVID deaths. African Americans are the ones who are the most ill and deathly ill from the pandemic. African American employment has risen to over 16.8%. And shockingly, 50% of African Americans are unemployed. Then George Floyd was murdered on tape, and protests have gripped all 50 states and many countries overseas. Therefore, Americans, all of us, were forced to face the second long-standing pandemic. The second pandemic is caused by systematic, historic, institutional, and structural racial inequality. Everyone on this phone knows that. Both pandemics have had a horrific impact on African American and other persons of color, resulting in death, illness, police and vigilante violence, disparities, injustice, education, professional achievement firms, disparities in health, employment, home ownership, and business entrepreneurship. It has had a terrible effect on us. But this is not all. Americans now face another crisis, an officially declared economic recession. We can't breathe. Both the pandemics and the recession have given our organization, these here and elsewhere, the opportunity to help and to continue and enhance our efforts on diversity and inclusion. So this webinar is a perfect opportunity. I'm glad to be part of it, to discuss diversity and inclusion in the time of COVID-19, systematic racial inequality, and an official recession. And I look forward to hearing and learning from my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, President Robinson. Irene, Alfreda just mentioned the fact that the pandemic, as well as the systemic racism, have a tremendous impact on communities of color. When we talk about D&I remember 2008 with the economic crisis, and when that happened again, those attorneys of color seem to have received the brunt of the impact, the negative impact. So we are afraid that we may see similar impact with COVID and with the tension that exists currently. How do you propose corporations and their legal departments and big law, how do you propose they focus on this issue and not let what happened in 2008 happen again?
Thank you, Marcos. So I'm Irene Oria, president of the HNDA, based in Miami, Florida. I'm a commercial litigator at a national law firm called Fisher Boyle. Happy to be here for this important discussion. Hearing President Robinson, obviously, we're also at the HMBA very worried about the impact of COVID-19 on our community of Hispanics. You know, as it was, we had an issue with the attack on immigration and immigrant families, and COVID-19, the economic recession, and everything else going on in the world right now just makes it, just compounds the issues for our community and for all of us. There are many ways, concrete ways in which corporations and law firms can and should direct their attention to diversity and inclusion now more than ever, because it's more important now than ever. And because when different minds work together, that's when you're able, to combat challenges. That's the best way to, deal with adversity, working together, diverse minds with diverse backgrounds. Some of the things that law firms can do, for example, and I'm at a law firm and I've been in big law. My firm is a different kind of model today, but I've been in big law. And the way that some of the things that law firms can do, Safeguard is a great example of, what law firms can do during this time to come together to support diverse law students and lawyers through this pandemic, through education, through collaboration, partnering with clients on diversity and inclusion efforts is more important than ever. Partnering with each other as bar organizations is more important than ever. Obviously, law firms partnering with organizations like ours, obviously that's important, so that we can work on programming, so that we can reach law students and young lawyers that are particularly hit hard during this time. Those are just some of the things. Obviously, now that we're not having so many in-person activities and our lives are different, now is the time to put that energy and time into looking at internally at your own company, at your own law firm, and saying, how are we really doing with diversity and inclusion? Are we hiring diverse attorneys? Are we promoting equally? Are we do we have the fairness and equity for all within this company or within this law firm? So understanding what the inequities are, putting in place plans, actual plans to address them, and how to play a role. Think about your role in addressing inequities in society as a whole. And obviously, sometimes what happens is that, yes, there are good intentions, but when you have your entire leadership of a big law firm or a corporation that doesn't look different, right? And those are the people that are working on solving these inequities or dealing with these inequities, then you can't be surprised if people are not happy with the answers that you're coming up with. So, it needs to be from the top down, for sure. Some of the things that corporations can do, obviously hold law firms accountable, hire diverse lawyers from big law, or hire smaller firms that are women-owned or diverse law firms. You can look to our organizations to find those diverse lawyers. You can look to NAMWOC and other organizations. There are so many organizations that you can partner with. If you truly want to reach out into these communities and find this diverse talent, it is definitely out there. And of course, again, because law students and young lawyers, it's so important to help them right now. Corporations should make an effort to hire them if they can, whether it's for clerkship or internship, and law firms as well. It's just with corporations, there may be more opportunity during this time. So normally corporations don't hire law students or first years, but they should make an effort to do so, especially in times like this.
Thank you. Wesley, as Irene mentioned, part of the recruiting process, we all know our spring, summer, and potentially fall have been, off significantly. And part of the recruiting happens during spring, summer, and fall. And particularly for attorneys, minority attorneys, that interview, that process is critically important. Now, with all this disarray, what do you recommend? How should law firms, corporations address that to, again, make sure that they stay focused on issues of diversity and inclusion? And if you could, with your answer, explain how Belonging Project comes to partner up with this issue, if you could.
Great. Thanks, Marcos. Um, well, again, I'm Wes Bazell. I'm president of the National LGBT Bar Association. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And so, the National LGBT Bar has been a longtime thought leader on issues of concern to LGBTQ judges, lawyers, legal practitioners, and law students. And, it's been a prominent voice in ensuring that both within the legal community and our larger societal community, that the interest of LGBTQ individuals are represented and are protected. And, echo what Dean Robinson, started with. I think, as it relates to law students, if we are feeling stress as lawyers, that stress is amplified within law students because they are, taking on generally massive amounts of debt. They are, about to graduate, some of them graduating now, into a job market that is fraught with, uncertainty. And so, and on top of that, as President Robinson said, they've been going to class remotely. They're now moving from, a Zoom law school to a Zoom law firm, essentially, in some cases for those law firms that are still even having summer programs right now. So, so I'll look at it from two different standpoints. One on the summer program, I think I think it's still vitally important, and the decisions have already been made by this point, but vitally important that law firms continue to have a summer program even during a remote work environment. What that means is, clearly different. It's not the, typical sort of wining and dining and networking that a big law typically offers to a summer associate. But I think it also is going to create a little bit of, it's going to ease some of the burden and concern that law students are currently feeling. But law firms are going to have to step up, and they can do that in a number of ways. They're going to have to, make sure that their, senior partners, senior associates, even junior associates are making a real effort to interact with those summer associates, to welcome them, to, it's going to be via webcam, but, to have some type of connection with them, so that they truly feel part of that community of work. I think also, and so that's going to, it's going to feel uncomfortable for people who are not used to, interacting by webinar, and, it may feel, a little fake in some ways, but it's most important for those lawyers within a law firm to sort of overcome any concerns that they have of that, and reach out to these summer associates and give them that networking opportunity. I think for and clients come into this as well. I mean, Irene made a very good point. This is also a time for companies to step up. So law firms can leverage their clients and help those summer associates interact with members of the legal departments of their clients. And so it's going to be a little bit of leaning into some discomfort, but I think there are a lot of opportunities. And then certainly on the recruiting standpoint, that has also been changing, and all of our bar associations have legal career fairs. The National LGBT Bar Association's career fair is the largest LGBT career fair in the country of any profession. And so, these become even more important because it's getting employers to have diverse candidates come before them, and it's giving the diverse candidates an opportunity to interact with employers. I think hopefully out of this, law firms, big law has been quite restrictive on, who they hire, in the sense that, where a student is graduating from plays a huge part in law firms, and there's a lot of ego related in that. And like Irene, I also had spent some time in big law before I came in house. But I think law firms need to reassess how they hire. It's not lowering the bar; it's widening the gate. If you have a top student at a law school, they're going to be a top performer, no matter if they're in a number 2 law school or a number 32 law school. And so, they've already demonstrated the skills that are going to be necessary to be successful. And so it's looking more broadly in that sense as well. And I think there are a lot of opportunities that law firms can utilize and make sure that they are, impacting the lives of diverse law students and diverse attorneys. A little bit about the Belonging Project, and this is a great example of a law firm, as President Robinson said, sort of stepping up. So Seyfarth Shaw, one of the partners, Laura Metlin, had an idea of how to make sure that during this time of crisis, this was several months ago, when we were dealing with just the coronavirus, whether, how can we make sure that we don't lose the very minuscule, to be quite honest, gains in diversity that the legal profession has achieved since the last recession. And so they created this opportunity. Laura was a past president of the National Bar Association. The HMBA also claims her. She was a Latina commissioner for the HMBA. And she and Seyfarth and Corey came together to create this Belonging Project, where the presidents, all of the diverse bar associations are part of it, as well as a number of other organizations, to really create, tools and resources and programs to support the development of diverse, lawyers and law students, especially during this time.
Thank you. Rippy, tagging along what Wesley told us, particularly on the recruitment front, can you talk about, more so than students and recent graduates, but what about other attorneys, particularly those that have been laid off because of COVID-19? What do you suggest, and what can your organization help attorneys like that deal with this process?
I'm happy to comment on that, Marcos. Thank you first for the opportunity to be here and to partner with all of you. I echo everyone's comments and sentiments thus far, particularly Alfreda Robinson's. So my name is Rippy Gill. I am the incoming president of the South Asian Bar Association of North America. We represent the South Asian legal community in the U.S. and Canada, and the unique issues that our community and constituents face since the wake of 9/11. This has been a very challenging time for many of our communities, and yes, we are facing 2 grave pandemics. The COVID-19 pandemic has very much disproportionately affected our community, and several of our community members have, in fact, been laid off or been, diverted, not been able to move forward with their careers in the way that we would all traditionally like to see or have seen. So as an organization, SABA North America has tried to really adapt to the evolving circumstances and situation that has been developing to adapt to the needs of our members. So what have we done in those instances? We've tried to just really provide a platform for our members, and particularly attorneys that have either been laid off, or junior attorneys that really are sort of stuck, right, with no path upward, or things are just at a halt. And we've created platforms for them to market their skills, for example, whether that's a webinar, whether that's providing some sort of mentorship and guidance and partnering them with someone, whether that's creating a referral network. And I want to comment a little bit on the referral network because I think that's a really important thing, particularly in our community, to help make sure that we refer matters and work to lawyers that are diverse, right? And have that conversation and not be afraid to do that. And so what we've tried to do is really partner folks that are struggling and partner them with other folks that are perhaps in the same practice area or, in a practice area they want to move to, and start that connection point and have a dialogue. And it has to start that way, right? Have the dialogue and then start moving the needle a little bit forward. And to Wesley's point earlier, I think you do have to also have the hard conversations with companies and corporations. I'm in-house at a company, for example. I'm starting to have those conversations. How do we go out and talk to attorneys that may have been laid off or are struggling and don't have a position coming right out of school, or perhaps are just junior associates and are just starting out and are now thwarted from moving forward? So we are in a position to really those folks, and we should be offering programs and opportunities and internships, whether it's a short program during the summer, whether it's a fall program or a spring program, whatever the case may be, the conversations need to be happening, and the conversations need to be happening around making sure that we are recruiting and retaining diverse associates, lawyers, judges, all of it. And right now, to a point that was made earlier, the reality is that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting minority groups across the nation. And we have to come together to address that. At SABA North America, we try to do everything we can to keep that engagement going. I think one of the positive things, if anything, I'd like to point out of coming out of COVID-19 is the strong engagement. I mean, 3 months ago, maybe we wouldn't have all been on webinars. We would have taken conference calls, and we would have been too busy to have a coffee, or we would have put it off and figured out what our calendars were like. Now, and personally too, I do take the time. If a law student or, an attorney that's struggling reaches out, I try to make the time. I make sure I make the time, and I pass that forward, and I tell my colleagues to do the same thing. Because ultimately, we're all in this together, and we have to make sure that, 20 years from now, our pipeline has a place. Because if we're stymied right now, what is that going to look like? So we are the responsible parties, and we have to make sure that we do all we can to move that needle forward a bit.
Thank you. Bonnie, let's try to cast a wider net. We all know, and President Robinson mentioned this, COVID has had an impact disproportionately on communities of color. Can you talk to us from the perspective of your organization and in general about the hate crimes, in particular anti-Asian sentiments, harassment, bullying, and how has your organization navigated those issues and assisted the community in general?
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for having me. I'm honored to be on this panel with such esteemed colleagues and fellow bar presidents. I'm Bonnie Wolf. I'm the president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association, which is the preeminent professional development bar association representing over 50,000 APA attorneys, judges, law students. I'm also an associate vice president at Nationwide, based in Columbus, Ohio. And just maybe stepping back, I think that's, I don't want to echo these sentiments of my colleagues who I'm completely in line with and in agreement. But for all of us, we're all we're bar leaders of national bar associations in which we promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are things that what we need to be focused on to be able to make sure that our associates, that the pipeline, that folks within our community feel like they belong and that they have a place. And so now is not the time to be rethinking this, to continue on these efforts that companies and law firms are focused on, and if anything, probably increase those efforts. I feel privileged that I am a Bar Association president like my other panelists, and we're uniquely positioned to be a national voice for our communities. Um, and so we stand in solidarity, and I think that's a big thing here. And what's unique is that we have this allyship amongst ourselves, and hopefully that can continue throughout all of your companies, your firms, because it's with that solidarity, it's with that unity that we can be able to have a broader reach and be a louder voice. And so while I'll touch upon about what's going on with the AAPI community, I know that it's not unique. As we've heard, minorities, all of us, our communities, our memberships are being disproportionately impacted by both pandemics. But, on behalf of NAPABA and, just what's going on in the current climate, we do stand in solidarity with our Black and African American colleagues and their community. When just touching upon our community, when COVID-19 hit, and as that began to rise and increase, we saw also the discrimination. And it's not a discrimination that we haven't known. We have a long history of this discrimination. And so it was disheartening, to say the least, frustrating, hurtful, sad, all of that when we started to see that because of the unknown, because of the fear, that there was this backlash amongst our community. That we were the cures of the disease, or that we somehow, because of the way we look, we had COVID-19. We know that the disease itself does not discriminate, and so we were just as equally susceptible of getting it, but no more than others. And so as we saw that, we then also saw the rise of hate crimes and the bullying. And so those are the things that, our organization, NAPABA, has been really focused on. And because of this, all of the fear and the hate and divisiveness, we've become a strong resource for our community to make sure that they understand how to combat hate crime, how the anti-Asian sentiments, making sure they understand the information that's out there related to COVID-19, the actual accurate information. And then also to make sure that we're arming our community with being able to report these crimes, to be able to stand up and speak out. I encourage folks, as we think about this group and those listening, to consider doing bystander training. It's so important to be able to understand and how to step in, because more than ever, you're probably seeing it, maybe not in person, but certainly in social media. And that is a way that misinformation at the very least is getting out there, but this hate speech and the hate crimes can also occur in social media. So we're encouraging folks to really arm themselves and understand how to be able to combat that. And then for our community, what we're seeing is there's this recent Portrait Project 2.0, in which we are seeing in our community, the AAPI community, that there's also a decrease in the pipeline. We are talking about, and I think that's right, Rippy and Wes, and my other colleagues are talking about, our colleagues within firms and companies, but also within law students. What we're also seeing is just the decline of, in our community at least, folks who are actually going to law school and registering. And now is the time that we can empower the younger individuals to say, you feel like you're lost and you don't know what to do. Don't be dismayed. This is, seek a legal career, your degree in law. This is the time that you can really figure out how you can be a voice and you can be an advocate, because as lawyers, we're uniquely positioned to do that. And so we're hopeful that, we're going to continue to look down even further in our pipeline to ensure that we are making sure AAPIs are also going to law school and then seeking other positions within the legal field.
Thank you. This is something I'm going to change a little bit. I wanted to read or share with you Robin DiAngelo in her highly acclaimed and best-selling book, White Fragility, presented the following statistics. The 10 richest Americans, 100% white. U.S. Congress, 90% white. U.S. governors, 90% white. Top military advisors, 100% white. The president's cabinet today, 91% white. And beyond that, people who decide which TV shows we watch, 93% white. People who decide which book we read, 90% white. Which news we watch, 85%. Which music is produced, 95% white. and teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. And I'll throw this, it was not in her book, attorneys, 85% white. The only group in double digits. So whether crisis or no crisis, social unrest due to systemic racism or something else, those making detrimental decisions when it comes to D&I are the same, unavoidably the same, that have been making those decisions since ever. So what I would like some of you to address, and we can start with President Robinson, is how does each of your organizations address this reality? How do you infiltrate or suggest to infiltrate those groups of decision makers so you can encourage and implement true change? And finally, when can we actually see palpable changes with regards to D&I? President Robinson.
Let me say that it's not something that happens overnight, but it is literally each one reach one. We have to speak truth to power, and to those who are standing in front of us. It doesn't mean we have to. We're having a rally tomorrow, actually, at Black Lives Matter Plaza. You're welcome to join us. But it's not just that. It's also focusing on what each of us can do in our space and what we can do with our sponsors and our law firms and our colleagues. And to ask, you know, these statistics, and I'm glad I didn't know where you got them from. If you could repeat that later, but these are statistics that should be embarrassing to our profession, to how we live, and so that when we're looking at, you know, where we are in the country, have we progressed enough? One thing we know is that educational institutions below higher education are becoming again segregated. That it's more likely that African American, Asian American, Hispanic Americans, others, that you be in a school that is predominantly yours. What is risen is what they call the new elites. And I wrote about this when I was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, that the new elites are us. Our children are not the ones who are in these schools. And that we are now populating the universities, as you know, with what they call, you know, the heritage babies. But everybody else is getting, you know, left behind. So what I try to do is it's uncomfortable, but have conversations with my law firm colleagues, my law firm friends, my law school, the folks, the people I work with my colleagues, with others, about can you hire one person? Can you push through one person? Can you mentor one person? When we talk about hiring at universities, those who are in majority, you know, in the majority, and this is what I'm talking about in terms of faculty, is this they are mentors. They learn, you know, do an article. It doesn't matter if you haven't been on law review. Do an article, do 2 and 3 and 4 articles, and they get mentored to make that article tight. And then when they've done their part in practice, now they go into the market. And I try to do that with all my students who are my research assistants, and where we are. But then globally, as a group, we need to bring this message and set up, to me, goals. All we say, we now expect 20% of every law firm to be populated by a minority, either racially or in terms of gender preference. reminded of this when my one of my former research assistants, was just proudly announcing, I'm the first openly gay African American chair of one of the largest organizations in the world. And I was just, I said, oh my God, this is, and married. I mean, I thought this was just such a great sign. And then when we hear these statistics, we say, well, within us lawyers, the legal community, are we doing better? Why is that a first in 2020 or 2019? So that's how I would say, what can we do? We need to start, have goals. This is what our goal is. And we're going to work in unified, where we are in universities. Universities have very, very few faculty members who have come from the Asian community. There are numbers of like 0 places. How could that be in 2020 at law school, the progressive end? Because we haven't really said, let's talk about how is it that this could be, particularly in urban areas, right? So that's a long way of saying it. We ourselves have to say we have a certain goal. We want to see 20% or 25% reflective of our population together, and then each one of us individual goal. I am going to get into my law firm a person, and I'm going to mentor them, or 2 or 3, even though the time is difficult. COVID-19 is difficult. But just as we talk about police funding being taken out and given to, other needed areas, education or whatever, homelessness, we can do that in our firms also in our hiring and making sure that we have diversity and inclusion.
Thank you, President. Wesley, I remember 2010, 11, 12, there was still this high opposition to same-sex marriage. And then it seems that like overnight, the public sentiment, the overall public sentiment to this issue changed. Is there something when it comes to diversity and inclusion that we can borrow from your organization, some idea that could bring that same rapid change in our society, where the issues that seem to be finding so many obstacles can go away overnight?
That's a great question, Marcos. And to round out the stats that you mentioned on law firms, in addition to the 85% white, it's 64% male and 98% straight. We are not, as a profession, reflecting the diversity of our communities, of the people we serve, of law schools at this point. And there is a lot that we need to do. As I was thinking about this webinar, then I'll get to your question. I thought about how we've been, not only are the messages that we're getting and the inputs from media or books or our music not being filtered through a diverse lens. Our history has been taught to us, for many of us, in not diverse ways. And so there's been this sanitized version that hopefully is changing with younger generations, but the sanitized version of American history, and not reflecting the realities of how we treated African Americans in the early 1900s, to how we treated Asian Americans and the Chinese Exclusion Act, and our immigration policies and how it affects Hispanic Americans. So I was thinking, at the time of our founding, none of us on this webinar would have had a seat at the table. We would all have been excluded. You know, I might have been included because I'm a white male, but I'm gay, and so that would have knocked me out of the running. Everyone else on this webinar would have been knocked out of the running. And so, you know, I'm reminded of Congresswoman Turley Chisholm's quote of, you know, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And so, you know, this is the time where we in our communities and our organizations are pulling out those folding chairs and stepping up. And, you know, one of the things to get to your question is, you know, I think one of the things that changed perceptions and changed hearts and minds on marriage is, you know, what Brian Stevenson calls the power in proximity. It's having people understand the experiences of LGBTQ individuals because people were coming out to them. They were meeting or discovering that they had LGBTQ members in their family, in their friends network, in their, you know, with their colleagues. And some of the stigmas and concerns and misperceptions of the LGBTQ community were allayed in that regard. And, you know, and so I think that is part of it. I think there's also a lot of allyship. We would not have won the successes that we had, and we've, you know, got many challenges. There's a Supreme Court case pending right now that could take away employment protections for wide swaths of the LGBTQ community. And, you know, but we would not have won what we've won if it wasn't for allies. It wasn't for straight people who were stepping up and supporting us. If it wasn't for civil rights heroes like John Lewis, who were also with us in the trenches fighting for marriage equality. And so, you know, I think what we've seen in the last few weeks hopefully continues in the broader Black Lives Movement, where there are a number of you know, so many of allies sort of stepping up and, you know, and being out in the marches and protesting. And hopefully that, you know, continues. And obviously it's going to need more than just, you know, stepping out into the street and protesting. Hopefully the allyship continues going forward. But I think all of us need to do that. You know, Bonnie led a great portion, allowed all of us to be allies with NAPABA on a Stand Against Hate video that came together in response to the racism that we were seeing related to COVID-19. And, you know, I think we, you know, the beauty of our organizations is, you know, we all know what it's like to be excluded. We all know the challenges that all of our communities face from a diversity and inclusion and equity perspective. And we do work together, and we do come together to address them. And you know, I'm honored to be part of that.
Thank you. Bonnie, Wesley mentioned George Floyd, and we all witnessed the horrendous murder of Mr. Floyd. And in hopes, and I think that's what Wesley was suggesting, in hopes that it can serve as a demarcation, a point where we see true changes in our society. But someone said the loveliest trick the devil plays on us is that it persuades us that it doesn't exist. So when we see changes occurring, they may not go as fast as we would want them to be, how and what can we do to not lose sight of our core values, of the importance of diversity and inclusion and equity?
That's right. And I think, you know, President Robinson, what she addressed it right, you know, that the situation that we came to didn't happen overnight. And certainly we're all A-type action-oriented people that want change, and we want change now. But what we're facing, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of effort. And so from my perspective as a bar leader, you know, that's just to continue to make sure our organizations have the right strategy and priorities as it's moving forward. And that's for us, for NAPABA, you know, it's standing with NBA and standing with the African American community. It is making sure that we have the infrastructure and our priorities are aligned. So part of that is for us is looking at our different groups and committees and recommitting to saying we want to make sure that we are crossing over and promoting the webinars and the work that NBA is doing and other counterparts. We want to make sure, to Wes's point, that we're having that allyship and that it continues, not just for our term, but continues for the organization as a whole. And so I think that we're doing that really well at this level is by making sure whoever comes in after each one of us, we're making sure they have the information, they understand what is needed of them and connecting them with each one of us as a coalition. But we have to stay vigilant. We particularly, as I think about our community, this isn't new for us. It's just resurfacing, and we thought we had come so much further. And it's just kind of a slap in the face to see that we haven't, and that we have a whole lot more work to do. But I am hopeful that these kind of efforts here of us having these kind of dialogues and conversations are unsurfacing these kind of issues, and that we can start working to figure out a resolution that is actually going to effectuate change for the long term.
Thank you. Both Irene and Ripi, if you could, not at the same time, but address this final question. We're running out of time, but I think that all bar organizations, share this goal, which is to transform the legal profession to make it look more like us. So what can you each tell us that we should strive to continue doing, things that we can improve on to make sure that change occurs?
Yeah, thank you, Marco. So, my colleagues have covered this well. I think allyship is very important. And just like, we all came together to support same-sex marriage, we all came together to support NAPAVA with the anti-Asian hate. The way that we've received support when there's anti-immigration attacks, it's basically continuing to work together to make sure that we're fighting for our communities to have a seat at the table. Until and unless D&I and racial equality and justice are part of the DNA of the government, of our companies, of law firms, we're not going to be able to have that palpable change that you're talking about. And gosh, I hope, I have 2 children. I hope that, when they're my age, that you won't need HMBA or NAPAVA or MBA, because it will be part of everybody's DNA. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to happen. And until we get rid of the systemic problems. But what we can do is continue to do what we're doing, and there's strength in unity. So continuing to do it together.
Yeah, and I echo everyone's points. I think also what we can do is encourage and stress the importance of having these very difficult conversations, right? As an example, in certain South Asian communities, it's very hard to have these kinds of conversations. It's almost taboo, right? But it's important to talk about it, have the conversations, and explain, what is happening so that the future generations are truly impacted and see that there is a need for change, right? So that there isn't just a cycle that is happening over and over again, so that in another 20, 30, 50 years, we are in a similar situation with perhaps another kind of pandemic, right? It's on us right now to make sure that we affect that change. So we have to have those dialogues. We have to, lobby our congressional representatives and senators. We have to show up and say, this is what you have to do, and we have to keep going up. Long after the protests are over and long after the pandemic has subsided, that doesn't mean that this conversation and the work that we need to do has to subside. It has to continue, and we have to keep standing in solidarity with each other and keep the movement going, because I can't imagine going backwards anymore. And I can't imagine a world where our children have to see this again in the years to come. So I'm thrilled and honored to be partnering with all of you.
Well, thank you so much. I believe we've gotten to our 1 hour limit, and I wanted to again thank each and every panelist and for their thoughts and contributions, not only today but from the work that they're doing on a daily basis with their organizations. And I also would like to thank the audience. Again, I apologize for the initial technical difficulties, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.